AI is going to kill a lot of work, and you're not going to need the workforce you do. But what you do need to know is what are those roles that really do impact customer and economic value. There's going to be some real comeuppance in the next 5 years around that. Organizations are going to go through some very strenuous change.
What do you think is the most challenging to drive if you are an HR leader right now?
We had 28,000 people in 1,000 companies. In fact, our findings, I hate to report them because they're too stark.
Most CEOs underestimate the single most powerful driver of long-term business success, the way they lead their people. In this episode, I'm joined by my good friend Dave Ulrich and in company with Dick Betty and Pat Wright, three of the most influential thinkers in human capability organizational leadership. Together, we unpack how to truly unlock value through people, not just as a function, but as the engine of your entire business. So if you think HR is still just about policies and payroll, this episode will flip your perspective. What's your view about the role of HR? Do they have a say about culture?
I think what we wanted today to be is strategic players on the field, in the game, and with the ability to score with the workforce, because the workforce will really make the difference.
A lot of times they've never really seen what good HR can look like. When CEOs see that, then it's like almost a come to Jesus experience of, oh, okay, this is what it could look like.
My criticism of CHROs and the HR function is they operate inside the organization, do what they're told. They need to operate more on the organization to bring about change.
You're in HR. What will you bring me to succeed in the marketplace? We believe there's three things. Number one.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to a new episode of the World Class Leaders Show. So today is really a special episode. So I'm so excited because, first of all, I have with me, someone I trust. They used to be on the podcast already, which is Dave Ulrich. Today is in company with two amazing leaders in the business industry, and then we'll come back to what is going to be the topic of today. So one is Pat Wright, and the other one is Dick Betty. So before me introducing the guest, I am going to ask the guest to introduce themselves. So because I'm sure if I do it, I'm going to miss so many great achievements and awards and things that you have done. So Dave, you want to start?
You bet. Thank you, Andrea, for allowing me and Pat and Dick to join you. I'm a professor at the Ross School of Business, University of Michigan. My passion is to figure out how does a senior business leader build an organization that succeeds over time in a changing and difficult marketplace by managing their people and their organization. That's what I want to focus on our discussion today.
Amazing. Thank you. Pat, over to you.
Yeah, so I'm a professor in the management department at the Darla Moore School of Business. I'm also the associate dean for corporate relations. And my career as a researcher has been around, as I like to describe it, as how do firms use people as a source of competitive advantage. So understanding in particular the role of HR and the chief HR officer and driving the success of a firm. And then also over the last 10 years, I founded the Center for Executive Succession, which focuses mostly on CEO and C-suite succession.
Great. Thank you, Pat. Dick, over to you.
Yeah, I've taught at several universities, University of Colorado, Rutgers, and of course with Dave at Michigan. HR is my first love, and figuring out how we can use and better use HR is always what I've wanted to do. With a colleague of mine, we wrote the first experiential HR book, which sold 200,000 copies. It was first kind of an impact book in teaching people how to deliver HR. And I really believe that, as I've said before, organizations don't change people, change organizations. So how do we build the kind of cultures and capabilities that can impact the strategic success by creating customer and economic value that enables the sustainability and survival of organizations? And as David said before, I think we're kind of at a point where the workforce is more important than ever before, and having people that can do and deliver those things that make a difference is going to change the success of organizations in the future.
Thank you. Thank you, Dick. Well, that is going to be such an amazing conversation. So I'm already a big fan of all of your work based on what you said. One thing I always say is there is no way for business organizations really to win in business until the human system is taken care of. And the human system is really the leverage. Somebody call it culture, somebody call it in a different way, but without the human system operating at its best, no way for organization to win. And I know, Pat, Dick, Dave, you are on a journey to launch a fantastic program for HR leaders, and we'll come back to it because that's something that is important for the entire global community, because that's so much value that I'm sure you're going to bring to the market. But before getting to that, we have a conversation to have. And when we were discussing before hitting recording was how can, the role of the human resource leader is perceived at the moment in business? Given what we said, we all, I mean, between all of us, we agree that people needs to be at the center of organization. Dick, you said it right. But how CEOs perceive, for example, the role of human resource leader to drive that? How critical, how is important is that role? Because my personal perception, and would be great to, to share thoughts, is some CEOs, they definitely get it, they see it, and they organize the entire organization around that. And other CEOs, they are so much focused on driving operations and making sure things happen and processes and all of that great things, but you must always come at the end. So what has been your experience and how CEOs and HR leaders are building this relationship?
The good news is this has been Pat's strike zone for 15 years. They've done studies of senior HR officers. So Pat, I'm looking forward to sharing your research.
Well, yeah. So we do a survey of chief HR officers every year for the last 15 years. And a lot of it has been around the role itself. And I also lead a program for potential chief HR officers through Cornell University that goes through once a year. And so that's where we've been. And, what's happened over all of that time is that CEOs, to their, not a criticism of them, but a lot of times they've never really seen what good HR can look like.
Yeah.
Unless they came up in an organization that had great HR, they may have just seen HR as kind of an administrative function that does the picnics, parties, and payroll. Don't really do much of anything other than say no, you can't do that, and don't really provide kind of insights and expertise around how can a company actually leverage its people to drive performance. When CEOs see that, then it's like almost a come to Jesus experience of, oh, okay, so this is what it could look like, and how I can leverage my people, and how my HR function that I didn't have that much respect for in the past, how they can actually really help me manage this business well. And so, what are those percentages now? I don't really know. If you talk with most CEOs at kind of Fortune 100 companies, I think they would say they get the importance of HR. There may still be variance in terms of how much they're willing to kind of really put their trust in their CHRO. But I'd say they've at least drank the Kool-Aid enough to know that it is important. But when we do dinners with board members to talk about CEO succession, and I can't tell you the number of times that when we talk about the CHRO, those board members look at like, what? Why would I want the CHRO involved in any of this? I mean, I've never seen a good CHRO, and so I think the further you kind of move down in size of organizations, the greater the variability. And again, even in mid-sized, small organizations, you could have fantastic HR people that are truly business people that are helping the CEO think through kind of the ways in which talent drives the success of the company, and how do you leverage that talent? How do you attract it? How do you retain it? How do you develop it? How do you motivate it? You'll still see that, but then you'll see more people that really are just kind of the prop and the cop to the organization. They say no, can't do that, and here are the forms that you need to fill out.
Great. Well, that's such a great start, and I'm glad that you're bringing data, to validate some points. I've already do a couple of questions. I would also like to play devil's advocate, but before that, I'd like to hear Dick, Dave, you have something more to add to it.
My criticism of CHROs and the HR function is they obviously operate inside the organization and do what they're told. I think they need to operate more on the organization to bring about change and bring the outside in. A lot of HR people know what they know by what they're told, and I think they need to be much more aggressive in finding out information from the outside, from customers, investors. Bring that kind of information in to the organization, read everything there is about their industry and so forth, so they really can participate and be able to be true change agents and learn the social dynamics of managing an executive team. So they realize that if they want different, people are going to have to do different. And how do we get that? And that means maybe we have the people we need, but if we can't change people, we're going to have to change people. And how do we build aggressive, strong organizations that can survive and thrive, contribute to their communities and to all the stakeholders that they are responsible for? It's a tough issue, but I think HR people need to kind of up periscope, look around, bring information in even before some of their business leaders know it. It's possible.
Great, Dick. That's an interesting perspective because that is close to the question I was going to make, and I will make it. But Dave, what's your view on that?
I love to start HR not by talking about HR. If I'm a CEO of a big company or a small company, I say, and Pat used the words, how do I compete? How do I succeed in the marketplace? That's on my mind.
Yes.
Well, the success is doing something my competitor cannot quickly copy. We've seen three common sources. I compete by having better strategy, products, services, customers. I compete by having better financials, better discipline, cost. I compete by technology. You talked about, Andrea, operations. I mean, those three circles are so critical. If I'm a CEO, do I have the right strategy? Do I have the right products? Do I have the right operational systems? Latest stuff is, and if you don't say AI 3 times in the podcast, we might as well fail. But do I have AI and technology? Do I have great financial discipline? We believe there's a fourth circle that integrates those three, and that's organization and people. And so if I'm listening, I'm saying, wow, as a CEO, do I have the right strategy, product direction? Got it. I'm pretty good with that. Do I have the right technology? Am I using AI systems? Do I have the right financial discipline? Do I have the right organization? When I ask senior business leaders to divide 100 points, what's going to differentiate you going forward that your competitor cannot quickly copy? Almost always, organization gets 40 points because it's the one that's hard to copy. It's a differentiator. And then I'm the business leader. I go, yeah, I've got to have the right organization, people. What Dick said, what Pat said is so true. How do I do that? There are a lot of consultants that would love to give you their solution. There's also great research on that. That's what we want to train HR people to do. Can I, as an HR person, help you, the business leader, build the right organization and people that will help us deliver strategic, financial, and operational excellence?
That's great. That is really brilliant convo. So here's an observation from my perspective, working closely to CEOs and as well to HR leaders because they always come together in that. Sometimes I feel like there are two things really. So one thing is sometimes it's difficult to understand is the CEO it doesn't see it, or is the HR leader that is not stepping up? I think it's a fair question that needs to be addressed because I think that was leading probably more in your point, Dick, that you were pointing to. What HR? How are you going to shape the role of HR so organization and people, David, you say, becomes the top of agenda rather than reacting and waiting for instruction, which that disempower the whole role of HR, in my opinion. So that's an interesting question, and I suppose you working with a lot of HR leaders. I'm sure that you're going to address that. So that's one area that I wanted to have a conversation about it. The second area, which is more all the notion about culture, the notion about culture is a strategy, is a process. I want to see a change, cultural change process, step by step, etc. That's one way of saying I don't agree with that. To me, culture is an emerging phenomenon, and you have to treat it as it is, not as something that you can drive from A to Z. So you can really change culture in that way. At least that's my view. But there is an expectation that HR is the person or is the function that needs to create that change. And I know many HR leaders, and will really welcome your view, they push back and say, is really me? Is it my job changing the culture organization? Can I do it? So what's your view about, the role of HR? Is it clear enough to the CEOs? Is stepping up as it should be to provide value, to shine organization and people? Do they have a say about culture? So I think that's would be an interesting combo.
I will refer to
have for your
Dave to
part?
talk about the culture piece because I mean that's he's definitely an expert in that area. But to your first question of is it that the CHRO or the HR folks don't have the ability to step up, or is it that the CEO doesn't see the role and isn't allowing them to step up? And the answer is yes. I think in some cases, it really is that the CEO has no idea what good HR looks like. And in fact, if you look at probably about 6-7 years ago, Gartner developed this model of a world-class CHRO. And motivation behind it was to be able to sit down with a CEO and say, this is what great CHROs look like. The things that they can do in terms of helping you with your talent agenda, managing your board, driving culture, dealing with executive comp. All of those things are things that a great CHRO can do. And it was that communication with the CEO of, so this is what you should be looking for in your next CHRO. So they may not know. Some of them, again, that may not know. I heard one CHRO talking about turning down a job at a really well-known company because when he interviewed there, the CEO said, listen, I think HR is extremely important. It is critical to what I do. And therefore, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to set aside 30 minutes with you every month to talk about that. Again, if that's the view, is that you're so important that I'm only going to spend 30 minutes with you a month, it really isn't your view. That's just kind of talking about it. At the same time, again, I've worked with HR folks over time, and there are fantastic ones. I mean, great HR people are just models for everyone, but there are also some that are not necessarily as great. And today there was a blog on the CHRO Daily from Fortune, and one of the things Brad Pugh, who's at Russell Reynolds, was saying, looking at the high amount of turnover of CHROs over the last year. And he said that most of the CEOs that they work with, when they're asking them what they want in the next CHRO, they're saying they want somebody that's more strategic. And the fact is, examples he points to are AI and tariffs. Those are two things that are going to have a tremendous impact on organizations.
Right.
You have a CHRO who's strategically thinking about, okay, what is AI? AI is going to change the nature of work. And if it's changing the nature of work, what does that mean in terms of the talent? Both the jobs, what things will be done by AI versus people, and what is the change in the type of talent we need to manage in that environment. Tariffs. We're now in a global environment. Who knows what's going to happen with tariffs, but obviously it could have a tremendous impact on our costs and our supply chain. Is the CHRO coming and saying, okay, as we look at these potential scenarios, here are the implications for our workforce. Here are the things that we can do to leverage our workforce to succeed under scenario A, where there's high tariffs and it kind of stifles global growth, or under scenario B, where the tariffs go away and now we've got something closer to global free trade. Is that coming from the CHRO strategically looking ahead and presenting options for the CEO to think about versus sitting back and waiting for the CEO to say, hey, we hear about AI. What are we supposed to do about that?
Yeah.
And HR now going out and trying to find an answer. So I think that's really great. HR has to be strategic. Again, there are great people in that way, but there's just variability. And so it's, how do we elevate so that instead of maybe 40% of the senior HR leaders having those kinds of skills, it's 60% or 70% and ultimately 100%.
Yeah, that's a great perspective, Pat. Dick, you want to build on it?
Now, sure. It hasn't been too long ago that HR was the, Society for Personnel Administration, and we're administrators. And then David came along and decided he would disrupt the field, and we began to talking about moving HR from being nice, polite people to having some real ability to impact the organization. And they became the police because we got all these laws and so forth. And so they, walked with a little bit of swagger. And then we got them to be strategic partners, a term that I know Dave is very familiar with. But I think what we want them today to be is strategic players on the field, in the game, and with the ability to score with the workforce, because the workforce will really make the difference. To do that, I think we've got to have different kinds of HR people that really know and understand the external environment, what's really happening. I think senior HR leaders need to demand that the people that work for them, every meeting they have, somebody's got to bring something that they've learned. How do they learn? How do they really get involved in the business and know the business as well as the leaders know the business and from the outside in, and try to basically, recognize the next bend in the road and recognize what do we have to do. So before the markets do it to us, maybe we can operate on it. So those are big challenges for HR folks. But I think that you think about any resource, organizations have financial material, information, time, all leaders have those, and they're held accountable for management. I think our leaders are going to have to be held accountable, and the HR function is going to have to be accountable for different kinds of expectations. And that means clarifying, what we really expect them to do and inspecting what they do to make sure those things are delivered. For me, that's a big change, a mindset change, as well as a competency change for the function.
By the way, I love from strategic partner to strategic player. That give, just in the terminology, give a sense of action and be in the field rather than being waiting. So that's such a great frame. Dave, anything from you?
Yeah, it's fun to work with people that we all agree, but let me pretend I'm a CEO listening. We're saying to you, you got to succeed in your marketplace. No question. That's the agenda. Because if we don't succeed in the marketplace, there is no workplace. You got to succeed in the marketplace. I got to manage my money, financial. I got to manage my strategy, product. I got to manage my operations. You're in HR. What will you bring me to succeed in the marketplace? We believe there's three things. Number one, I'll give you great talent. I'll anticipate the talent necessary for the future. What kind of people are we going to need in an AI world? What's going to be done by the human? What's going to be done by the algorithm? They call them agents, but they're algorithms. Where am I going to get people and the workforce to succeed? I in HR will anticipate what's next. Second, I'm going to bring you great culture, great workplace. I'm going to help you define the workplace of the future. And third, I'm going to help you have the leadership bench that will carry off that agenda. We believe those three elements, simply defined, we call it human capability. Human is the workforce, capability is the workplace, leadership brings them together. I'm going to bring you talent, organization, and leadership that will help us succeed in the marketplace. And if you're a CEO listening, that's what Pat, I think, just said. How many CEOs would love to have an HR professional who can give them that? My bet is most would say, yeah, if you can give me that, because often there's an old stereotype of HR, the Dilbert cartoon. It may not be as popular in Europe, but it was in the US. They're the behind the scenes, the pink, the eye shades. No, that's not the HR we're talking about. And I'll give you an example with culture, because that was your second question. To the CEO, I'm going to help you create a culture in a new way. Most people, when they say, what's our culture? They say, I have a set of values. We believe in service. We believe in innovation. We believe in efficiency. Our view is that's the wrong place to start culture. Remember, our whole theory that Dick talked about and Pat talks about is success in the marketplace. Start your culture definition with what's the brand identity a customer has that will cause them to buy your product? Well, that's an interesting question. We have the best service. We have the best technology. We have the most innovative product. That external brand should be the foundation of your internal culture. Our values inside should create value for our customer outside. And our culture should be a source of economic value. I've worked with business leaders in some programs, and I say, culture is our values. And they go, okay, that's fine. Who defines what the behaviors are of those values? The customer. What does service mean to you? Let the customer define the behaviors that we need to reflect the value to them. And then third, when we do those values, will you buy more product from us? Every time I work with executives, they go, here comes another culture, bring a pet to work, wear casual Friday as we all are. You see our offices, you see us casual. No, culture is the identity of the firm in the mind of your best customer made real to your employee. And when you get that integration, the customer is going to buy more product. And business leaders go, wow, I've never defined culture as the identity in the mind of my customer made real to my people. Now culture is a source of real economic value because customers buy more. That's an example. Talent, we don't want to be the employer of choice. We want to be the employer of choice of employees our customers would choose because they're going to do more business with us. Leadership, We all run leadership training programs. You have a great webcast. Here's the skills of leaders. Are those skills going to get a customer to buy more product? Are they going to get an investor to invest more with you? Are they going to build a reputation in the community? That's the player role that Dick talks about. We play in the marketplace. And if you're a CEO and you want that, don't allow the HR people to go anywhere else. That's what we're trying to create in this world, is HR professionals who enable and drive business outcomes.
Love it, because I think, first of all, the way how you say and the way you describe it, really you're going to get an interesting client, an interesting buyer internally, which is the CEO, because otherwise he doesn't see how to connect the value of the business to the value of what you explain. So I think that's such a great framing. And also I think it reflects how looking at things through the lens of the customer changed totally the dynamics and totally changed the way how everybody should see the work and the business. Now, to your point, Dave, there are three things. So you're right. I mean, simplification, at its finest. Three things that, if done, are going to create value for the business. What you think is, and that's the question, of course, for everybody, what you think is the most challenging one to drive, if you are an HR leader? There are the three things. One is really now related to how the future is changing and predicting what kind of skills and workforce for the future. I know is an issue. It's not easy as maybe it was before. Maybe it's just a perception. Culture, everybody is complaining about how the workplaces are not operating, in order to drive their performance. And three, leadership. Well, there is still a vacuum of leadership in many organizations, despite, as you say, we talk every single day about leadership. Yet we have this vacuum in many organizations. So what do you think is the most challenging to drive if you are an HR leader right now?
Pat and I just did a study a few years ago where, Pat, I think we had 28,000 people in 1,000 companies. Look at talent, my fingers, organization, my fist, and leadership, the combination. And which of those are going to drive the outcomes you care about the most? In fact, our findings, I hate to report them because they're too stark. I'll let Pat's the researcher and the scholar here. But those were amazing, Pat.
Yeah. Well, and what's kind of amazing is that we tend to think of talent as being those competencies and skills of the people there. And what our results tended to show is that it's the organization that drives most of the value. And that, when you've got the right organization in place in terms of culture and strategy and all of those things, processes, great workplace, that's what's really going to have a stronger impact on success than talent and leadership necessarily. Again, not that talent and leadership don't play a role, but the biggest role was the organization piece.
Yeah, I want to build on a couple of Pat's points too, because the two big things that Pat mentioned were tariffs and AI. And I think tariffs and AI are going to change a lot of things because, first of all, tariffs are going to cause a lot of real pressure on cost and asking serious questions about what workforce do we have, what workforce do we need, and what is the work that is absolutely essential, and basically going to be very disruptive to a lot of people and a lot of lives. Beyond that, beyond tariffs, AI is going to kill a lot of work. Yeah, and you're not going to need the workforces you do. But what you do need to know is what are those roles that really do impact customer and economic value? What are those roles? How well positioned are you in terms of the quality of the workforce you have? And can you transition the workforce you have to be able to do those things? And I think there's going to be some real comeuppance in the next, 5 years around that. And organizations are going to go through some very strenuous kinds of change. As I always remind myself and remind Dave that if you go back, several years to Fortune 500, if you look at them today, of those 500, only 49 of those organizations are still here. That kind of change has taken place, but I think we're going to see an acceleration of that kind of change and a big upheaval. And I think HR's got to play a role to being very honest and very straightforward about what we need to do. What work really is strategic? How well populated are we in that work? What kind of strategic talent inventory do we have? Do we need? all of those kinds of issues. So that's my little sermon about that.
Yeah, and let me build on what Dave was talking about before, just because I'll tell a story. A number of years ago, Kevin Cox, who was the head of HR at American Express and then at GE, was guest lecturing in my class, and he was telling the students, he goes, when you can align strategy, culture, and talent, he goes, you get those three things aligned, you are really in the sweet spot of what's going to drive the success of the organization. They didn't really talk about what that looked like. As I thought about it and was working with some companies, what had occurred to me is, if you think about what strategy is, a big part of strategy goes back to Dave's point, and that is trying to decide what's the valued outcome that we're going to offer customers that's going to make them want to buy from us instead of our competitors. What is it that's going to be different that's going to make them want to do business with us? Dave's definition of culture is that the value of a culture really depends on the extent to which it actually drives customer value. And then when you think about talent, who is talent? Is it everybody? Well, a lot of companies will say talent, to Dick's point, is who are the people that have a disproportionate impact on the value to the customer. So when you say, how do you align strategy, culture, and talent? You start with value to the customer. Who's our customer? What is it we're doing to offer them something that's going to differentiate us from our competitors? And then what does that mean for the culture we need to build? And the strategy that we've got to have, and the talent that we've got to have to execute against that.
The only problem is that customers are fickle and they change. And they change, and we have to change, and we like to change before we have to change.
I've just got to mention, I was looking off to the side in my house, and this has never happened, Andrea, in any of your podcasts. I have my door open, and a group of deer walked up, and they started looking in my door. And I thought, I'm going to have to jump up in this podcast and chase a deer out of my house. Now they've moved on. So I am now back into the podcast. The deer looked in, they heard what we were talking about, and they ran away, which is probably not the first time.
They were not much interested into the
No,
conversation.
they're not interested in anything we're talking about.
At least they didn't take a nap. That would have been worse. So,
well, I'm worried what they may have left outside my office, but I know you've never had that in one of your podcasts, but that's why I was looking away, thinking, if that deer takes another step, I've got to get up and go make a conversation with the deer. But the deer are gone. We're back to what matters. So,
yeah, keep an eye, just in case. Keep an eye.
Trust me, I don't want the deer things to be inside the house. As long as they're outside, it's okay. This is such an exciting time, because if I'm a business leader, markets are changing. I mean, Dick said it, Pat said it, you know it. Business leaders are under so much stress, so much demand. If we can give you, the business leader, more confidence in your talent, your workforce, your organization, workplace, your culture, and your leadership bench, what would you pay for that? I mean, that's what we find in research. That's the intangible value investors are now looking for. Why is the intangible value more critical than the financial return? Because I trust that you're going to build my organization and people in the future. And if the HR people can get their heads around that, they're not here to do HR. They're here to help you succeed with the issues you worry about. And we're trying to help HR people get there. Many are there. Pat can list all. Once we start listing people, we get in trouble, because they call us after the webcast and they say, why didn't you say my name? I've had that happen. And I say, because you're not that good. No, I don't say that. But the principles are so, at one level, obvious. HR is not about HR. It's building value with all your stakeholders. The human and human resources are all the human beings who work with your company. A customer is a human being. An investor is a human being. A citizen is a human being. Your job in HR is to serve all of those humans in partnership as a player, as Dick said, with the senior business leader, with you, the business leader. That's an inflection point. That's an inflection point.
So let me, by the way, I do agree with all of you totally. But let me bring one element to the conversation. I mean, most of you are pointing to in terms of tariffs and then what's going to happen and the level of uncertainty. But the reality is also that, studies now are confirming that the average tenure of CEOs is shrinking. So it's less than, and by the way, I think that applies to all other C-suite roles, as far as I understand. Maybe Pat, and you are in the research space, probably you have more data to confirm that. But clearly the CEOs, that's changing, from 9 to 7, 5, 4 to some extent. So that is a more an assertion than a fact. But my assertion is based on some evidence of work that I've done with my clients is when you work on such a shorter time frame than what you used to, the element Dave and all of you are bringing in terms of talent, the work for the future, the culture, and leadership, etc., although it's critical for performance, we all agreed on, there is a risk that it might become less a priority in some CEOs' mind because they have to drive performance right now. They need to. That's why I see CEOs stepping in too much in the trenches and become the operational CEO, which I don't think is the point of being a CEO, but some do. And I feel, because I know where they are right now, is all this pressure coming from investors, expectation, etc., is building up to the extent that their bandwidth for what they can do and what they need to drive is so limited. They need to focus on operations, performance, financial, because that is going to save their job, their future, their career, and still drive results, right? So I notice how much HR struggle to deal in this context where pressure is so high because they don't feel like they're listened or heard because the priorities for the CEO is somewhere else. How can this HR, in other words, can shift the conversation to what really matters? To your point, Dave, why CEOs are all over the place because there's something else as a priority.
Well, let me jump in and say that yes, I don't disagree that CEOs may feel that pressure to deliver results soon, but it's unclear to me that that's necessarily true. So a number of years ago, we interviewed board members, and the goal of the study was to identify how they knew whether or not they'd made the right CEO succession decision. And so we would ask them, kind of like, what were the things that you were looking for to determine whether or not you'd made the right decision after that CEO was in office? And inevitably, what they said was that for the first 12 to 18 months, they barely look at the numbers because they say for the first 12 to 18 months, the numbers the company puts up are the function of the previous CEO. It's going to take at least a year for a new
Of
CEO
course.
to make his or her
Of
mark
course.
on the organization. And so, what they were looking for, and this is the amazing thing, what they're looking for is all of the less tangible things, like are they making the right talent moves on the team? Getting rid of a mediocre or poor performer and bringing in a better talent in a particular role. When they're in the board meetings, does the executive team, look engaged and motivated, like they're really behind what the CEO is trying to do? Have they articulated a strategy? Again, not knowing it can't be executed yet, but have they developed and articulated a strategy that the board understands? And so what the board's looking for, all of the things that Dave was just talking about. Do they have the right talent, the right organization, right strategy, those things, because they know that the numbers are going to take a while to filter in based on what the CEO is doing. And so I don't disagree they feel that pressure. And often what you'll see is that, again, a great CHRO is helping that CEO. I mean, normally there's an announcement that this person's going to become CEO 6 months from now or 4 months from now. And in that time, what they're doing is that they're actually working with that CEO to say, okay, how can I help you get up and running before you set foot in the role? How can I help you think through your strategy? How can I help you think through the talent moves you're going to need to make in the first few months? And even in some cases, have the current CEO make some of those talent moves so you don't come in looking like you're firing people, but those people have already left. And so, again, a great CHRO helps that person to manage the process so that once they sit in there, they're actually hitting the ground running rather than, okay, today's the day, and now I start thinking about strategy, and now I start thinking about talent, and now I start thinking about culture.
Great. And by the way, Pat, I also don't disagree with what you said. I think sometimes it's just a perception, really. So it's not the truth. There's nothing right or wrong. It's just the perceptions building in a CEO's mind in terms of what is expected from the work rather than what is really needed. And I'm sure that some boards are more strategic than some CEOs in terms of what they want to see. And the three things that you guys said is actually top priority for many boards. So I totally get that. Dick, what's your view?
Well, hard to disagree with my friends here. One of the things I think HR needs is some real rules for how we manage HR. In another phase of my life, I was an accountant. There's all kinds of rules, and almost every other resource has rules. And what are the rules for HR? One of my favorite rules is that before you can promote anybody to a strategic job inside, you have to interview 3 externals, because the labor market for that position isn't just inside your organization, it is outside. So how do we continue to bring new and different kind of information in and hold people accountable for their workforces and so forth? And so we're not just promoting somebody because they've been here a good while and we like them, and they look like they might be pretty good at that. But if you're going to grow people, then part of it is giving them opportunities. And I really believe in that rotation, but also seeding the organization with new kinds of models of behavior, and so that they can begin to learn from others, just like in professional sports teams. I mean, professional sports teams, obviously, you're only as good as, last Sunday. And we, observed you, videotaped you, and then learn how to do it. And by the way, next week we're playing a different team. They have a different strategy. And now you got to learn this stuff. So I think we're going to have to get more serious about who we hire, how we grow them, and bring much more of the outside in and bring them examples of new ways of doing some things. So
let me give the business leaders on the call. I love simple tests, a test with their HR. Go to your HR person and ask them a question. What do you as the HR person see as your biggest challenge in your job today? Now, they better not name a person. That would be really inappropriate, especially coming from HR. But here's what we find when we ask HR people that question. My challenge is to manage the culture. My challenge is to build leadership. My challenge is to hire the right people, to pay the right people, to do good work. We hope that a year from now, that answer is different. Business leader comes and says, what's the biggest challenge in your job today? My challenge is to help us as a company get more revenue from our key customers, to help our investors have more confidence in our future earnings that increases our market value, reduces cost of capital, increases market value, to get a better internal rate of return. My challenge is to help our company build a reputation in the marketplace that exceeds every expectation. That's my challenge. By the way, if you're a CEO and your HR person answers the way I just answered, my challenge is to get customers, to deliver strategy, to do that, don't attend our program. In fact, don't let us mess you up. But if your HR person talks about HR as their challenge, help them. These are great people. We see the inflection point saying, we're going to change that challenge in HR. We don't disagree with, nobody disagrees with leadership or culture or performance review or training. Those are great tools. But when they can be applied to building success with all stakeholders, all the humans, the customers, the investors, the communities, etc., boy, that's a nice thing. And that's what we're trying to help the HR community move forward with. Will we get there? I don't know.
I think that's a great example. I just hope, first of all, that they know the challenge. And secondly, they know how to deal with the challenge, and they're willing to share how do you go about doing those things to make that stuff happen. Knowing and doing are two very different things. And I hope that they understand what, and I hope that they are creative enough to figure out how and get more of the behavior they want and less of the behavior they don't want.
Well, and you saw some examples. I mean, Dick is an expert in performance management. We do 360s. Guess what? For a lot of those key positions, we're going to do a 720. The 720 says we're going to go get data from your customers. That's what matters. Pat does succession. We set the criteria for a senior business leader. Guess what? We're now going to include a customer and investor. What do you want to see in our business leaders so that you'll invest more money or that you'll buy more product? Suddenly, leadership is not about what we think you need. It's about what our customer thinks. Culture. What are the values you want us to have? Service. What are the behaviors you need to see? Well, we're going to get the customer to define that. Boy, and when we do it, that's value. It sounds so obvious when, at least for me, because I've been saying this for so many years, that it's obvious but it sounds so obvious, but we're not there yet as a profession. And we're trying, not because we love HR, but because we want you, the business leader, to build a company that succeeds.
That's such a great message. And I really always love Dave. How you simplify things to really what matters, and that to me, it's also a very consistent message, which to me is reinforcing, the point that you're making. So before we get to the end of the show, by the way, that was such an amazing conversation. I had no doubt about it. Would you mind to tell us a little bit more what you're up to, guys? Because it sounds like you're up to something in terms of helping HR leaders to do
Well,
something
we
else.
turn to Pat. Dick and I have been in Michigan for 40 years. We've run hundreds of these programs, and we want the next generation. And if you look at us, that's clearly Pat, because we're the old generation. We're transferring all leadership equity and insight to Pat, and we are so excited to partner with him and the Darla School of Management. Pat, you.
Yeah. So when Dave and Dick began this conversation with us, one of the questions was, well, who's the right academic, kind of institution? And I think one thing that's great about the Darla Moore School of Business is that over the past 10 to 15 years, we've actually developed a master's program in human resources that is kind of best in the world. A lot of people will talk about Cornell's program as being best. I was at Cornell. I'll selfishly say our program is as good, if not better, than Cornell's program. So we're kind of a great place for HR. But the Moore School has also been historically known for international business. So for the last 26 years, our undergraduate international business major has been ranked #1 by US News and World Report. The last 12 years, our international MBA has been ranked #1 by US News and World Report. So IB is what's core to the school. And as we put together this program, we really said we want it to be three things. One is, as Dave mentioned, it's going to be made up of kind of an all-star cast, bringing in people that are the top thought leaders in the field to take participants through these concepts. Second is that it's going to be global in perspective. And so, we've got pretty much the heads of most major HR professional societies around the globe that'll all spend an hour talking about this is what's going on in Asia. This is what's going on in India. This is what's going on in the UK. So having that global kind of content being delivered. And then last is this idea of we want it to be a global participant base, not just a bunch of US leaders all sitting in a room together, but having a chance to really connect with folks from all around the globe and share thoughts, share challenges, and build that. And so, again, all of this is aimed at how can we take, as Dave mentioned, what we've got right now is that all of the challenges that companies face, again, tariffs, AI, wars around the world, all of that stuff. What that's done is it's created a demand for companies to be able to leverage their people to actually compete. And so the question is, what's the supply of people that can help leaders do that? And so our hope is to be able to increase the supply of those leaders that can actually sit down with the CEO and say, here's how we can achieve these organizational objectives. And guess what? I'm focused on the business, but I've got a toolkit that deals with a lot of stuff in HR that I can help. And I think that's what we're hoping to get out of this program. It's going to be a great program, 100 days total. Probably a month before, it'll be sessions trying to help them through developing a project that they want to work on. They'll come to campus, spend 8 days on campus, hearing from the presenters, working on their projects. We'll have faculty that'll be coaching each person on their project. And then they'll go away, and for the next few months, we'll continue with some other webinars and coaching. And so it should be a great experience. I should also add the pre-part is going to be an assessment. It'll be having them assessed in terms of their own competencies and doing kind of an organizational diagnosis. All of that will go into their project and then to their coaching. So we think it's a fascinating program and just a great partnership in terms of bringing the obvious expertise and reputation of Dave and Dick, but also partnering and bringing together the capabilities in international business and global perspective with the Moore School.
Great. Well, we'll definitely, by the way, what's the name of the program and when it's going to start?
It is a Global Human Resources Leadership Experience. And the dates are October 28th to November 4th on the campus at the University of South Carolina in Columbia.
Great. Well, fantastic. Well, first of all, I wish you good luck. It sounds amazing. So I'm sure that will be a fantastic experience for people that will join. And we'll add the link to in the show notes so people can click and look at the program, and hopefully, there are more people that will join. So,
one last thing. Can
sure,
I
Dick,
add? Yeah.
bring us home.
My fondest dream of all this is that these people come together, learn from one another, and they kind of screw up their courage to go back and do different, and really go back and do different. I think that's really important. If they don't go back and do different and don't behave differently, I think we haven't delivered. Same time, every sales call I make and trying to sell this program, I think they ought to send 2 people rather than 1 person. So they got somebody else to talk to. When they go back, they've got somebody else to work with that knows why they're doing it, saying those things. And so far, I've got a couple of those that I need to get more. But I just think that's a good idea to help them be able to accelerate their career and accelerate change in their own organizations.
Great. Thank you, Dick. So thank you, everybody, for joining me today in this podcast. So it was amazing conversation. And yeah, thank you so much. And again, congratulations and good luck with the program.
All right. Thanks, Andrea.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you,
you, Andrea.
Andrea.